I'm excited to be here with you today for some thoughtful and curious conversation about two-eyed seeing and talking about our Giwidabindimin and Giwiidosendamin programs. I'm Nathan Gerbrandt. I'm going to be your moderator for our time. Our time will largely be a conversation with JC and JC Chartrand and Melanie Bazin. And before we launch into that, I want to ask JC Chartrand to ground us with some words about locating ourselves. So JC, why don't you take a moment?
Thank you, Nathan. I want to have a land acknowledgement today to acknowledge we stand upon Treaty 1 territory. This land carries the footsteps of Anishinaabe, Cree, Asininu, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and is the homeland of the Métis Nation. The traditional lifeways of the land and teachings intertwine with a worldview of earth and sky in community with one another. This land is part of a relationship that has nourished, healed, and protected, embraced life up to and including our present day. This worldview is founded on the unity of the cycles of the sky, the balance and the forces of life that provide for harmony within our bodies, as well as the world around us. I want to acknowledge this legacy from my own teachings and want to thank elders for their wisdom they've shared. I also want to promote this balance as we pursue our goals of knowledge and understanding today, and that we also find inspiration and spirit to open our minds and our hearts.
Thank you, JC. Let's take a moment and get to know you too. I have the privilege of working with Melanie as Director of Indigenous Services at CTRI. I have always, Melanie, appreciated the gentle way you share your opinions, your thoughts, especially when they differ from my own. And so I just want to acknowledge and thank you for that wonderful part of our relationship. But Melanie.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Melanie Bazin. My spirit name is Nigani Mugate Makwa Ikwe. I'm from the Maingan Dodem. So that's leading Black Bear woman of the Wolf Clan. I'm Red River Métis from St. Malo, Manitoba. I'm a mother, a wife, a sister, a daughter, an aunt, a friend. I'm a helper, and I work as the Director of Indigenous Services at CTRI. I'm honored to be sitting with all of you today, and I hope to share in a good, kind, and gentle way. And in my mind, I'm seeing us all sitting in a circle together somehow, although it's virtually, we're all here together today.
Thanks, Melanie. JC Chartrand, I'll give it to you in a moment, but I just want to acknowledge you're the Senior Manager with Indigenous Programming. I've found you to be an inspiring trainer. You're a counselor, a leader in the field of mental health and addictions. And I've always found you to be a calm and presence and deep thinker. And I always leave our conversations wondering, oh, that's a new way of looking at it. I hadn't thought about that. JC.
Thank you, Nathan. I really appreciate your kind words. Hi, everyone. My name is JC Chartrand. My family is from Dog Creek community on Lake Manitoba First Nation. I grew up off reserve. I am somebody who identifies as being Cree Métis. I am part of the Red River Métis folks here on the homeland of Treaty 1. I describe myself in my work through doing helper work, through doing therapy work, addictions work, and now work with CTRI and a lot of the community spaces that we get to walk into communities with. And for me, it's all about being a connector. And I like to watch people being able to connect with each other, bringing in spirit and safety, as well as being able to connect new thoughts, new ideas that are sometimes outside of our, I'm going to say, our cognitive experiences, but rather than the safety of connecting with our hearts. And what is spirit guiding us to connect with? And so I really find a lot of inspiration in that in my work. And I'm really grateful to be a part of CTRI here, as well as part of the communities that I get to walk with.
Thank you, JC. And me, I'm Nathan Gerbrandt. I'm the managing director here with CTRI. I'm also a fourth generation immigrant to Southern Manitoba and Treaty 1 territory. I was raised in a strong, devoted Mennonite family and community for which I am eternally grateful to the values, service, humility, and curiosity that were instilled in me. I've been trained professionally as a social worker, and my approach to healing, to social work has really been driven by the importance of community, the importance of building relationship bridges that connect people, that enhance their individual stories and their individual and collective capacity for resilience. And so I'm also passionate about training and trauma-informed approaches to building strong communities. And so in a moment, we're going to go to some Q&A, but I'd like you all to take a moment while we transition to write your name in the chat. And if you wish, also write where you're joining us from. It's amazing that we have people usually at these things joining us from all around North America and the world. And while you're doing that, I'll note that we have about half an hour of time for Q&A that I will lead with some questions that Mel and JC and I have been kind of putting together that we thought would resonate with you. But as we go over this time, you may have questions that you want to pop in the chat. I have some support to monitor that, and we will finish with taking some of your questions in Q&A and pose those to JC and Mel. And also, this is a peer sharing and learning opportunity, so you will have your own resources and ideas. So feel free to offer those as well. The reciprocal nature of this approach is paramount, and we'll get into that. And I see people joining us from all the way as far as Poland. That's wonderful. So JC and Mel, I'm not sure who wants to take this first question, but this is really all about an introduction to two-eyed seeing. And I think it would be really important to kind of ground us. What does two-eyed seeing mean? So would one of you want to kick us off and let us know your thoughts on two-eyed seeing?
I get really passionate about talking about two-eyed seeing and how it relates to the work that we're doing here at CTRI. Two-eyed seeing is a term that was coined by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall. And it's really about highlighting the importance and the value of seeing through both an Indigenous perspective and a Western perspective, and how that can enrich how we see the world, enrich our learning. And at CTRI, I think we've gone more than those two eyes. So we're separating the Indigenous eyes into multiple eyes and the Western eye into multiple eyes so that we can see the world from various different perspectives. And really get to know from each other, about each other, and with each other.
And to me, two-eyed seeing also brings in the ideas that there is no one right answer, right? If we look at that space where everything is in balance with each other, everything is in harmony with each other, that there's multiple perspectives that not only I feel are valued in being seen, but as well as valued in coming together and being collaborative. Right. And so taking those pieces of ideas here, and that there isn't no one way of knowing, but rather than there are several ways of learning and several ways of teaching and several ways to be receiving information and to really come up with new ideas and new ways of doing things. And I think that also goes back to that spaces and a bigger space of healing, of finding new ways of walking and new ways of doing pieces that have come together with community and collaboration.
Thank you. As a social worker myself, and I imagine many people that are joining us are in the helping field as professionals or just naturally with family, I'm curious if you can even go a little deeper on that, and how does a two-eyed seeing approach work or contribute to like a holistic understanding of wellness or in people's helping practices?
Yeah, I think that two-eyed seeing works well when we look at how we decolonize what we're doing as well, to again invite different perspectives. To hear from perspectives that might have been oppressed historically, and how important it is now to bring awareness to those voices, to create space for those voices. So two-eyed seeing allows us to do that. And I think when we go on to talk about the programs that we're highlighting today, we use that two-eyed seeing approach within those programs by having an Indigenous facilitator and a non-Indigenous facilitator, and together they weave their knowledge, their gifts, and also invite participants to do the same.
Mm-hmm. And for me, I think there's an idea too where we want to look at incorporating Western innovations. Our world is moving so quickly and changing so quickly, and a lot of tech and a lot of connectedness happening in new ways through technology and innovation. And yet, how do we still bring forward those spaces of knowing of our past and our traditions? And I've been talking lots lately about our elders have been telling us for generations, through our traditions and through our own learning with our communities. And so how do we bring those same teachings and still have them? Because they're still present with us. They are still alive. They're still living. And to ensure that we are still seeing those perspectives as we are bringing in new innovations, both from the Western world, as well as new innovations from our cultural spaces. Right? Our voices are being heard in a different way, and we are having new and different conversations these days. And it's really exciting to be able to have multiple perspectives, lend a voice, and also lend knowledge into how can we continue to walk together in a good way.
About these programs, and that there are facilitated by both Indigenous and non-Indigenous facilitators. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little more about how that co-facilitation model plays out during these programs.
For me, that co-facilitation model is that I carry one journey. I have been on this journey for some years now, and I can only share what I carry. I can only share what's in my bundle, and I cannot share the stories and experiences and wisdom and learning that other people have done. And so when I walk into a space with training, and it's beautiful having a co-facilitator because now I get to share my journey, also inviting and creating safety and space for them to share their journey from a different perspective in a different place. And so, I get to have this one way of knowing and walking, and other people get to bring in other ways of knowing and walking as well.
And again, bringing that to the participants that are there. So it goes beyond the facilitators that are in the room, but also the knowledge of the participants, sharing what they know, their bundles coming alive, their gifts being shared. And again, everybody has their own walk through life, their own stories that they can share. And this makes me think too, that a lot of questions around our programs is, how are we not making this a pan-Indigenous approach? How are we ensuring that? And that is just the way that we're doing that, is by sharing only what we carry, but creating space for others to share what they carry.
And with our programs, we'll also have trainers from all different areas around Canada. And the beautiful part about that is that the spaces that I occupy, I will only share my story, my teachings, what I have learned. And so as we have several different trainers coming from different areas and different nations across Canada, they share what their teachings and what their learnings are from their communities as well. And so it really comes down to an individualized approach that is, I think, a beautiful thing about each program is very different, partly because each training team is going to bring different learnings, but also the people in the room are going to be bringing different learnings. And depending on where you are, where you decide to lean into one of our programs, it's going to be different learnings and spaces of tradition being brought in there because we are sharing what we carry individually. And it's a beautiful experience to come together.
Thank you. For those that are unfamiliar with these programs, I wonder if you can share a little bit about some of the practicalities of it. Where do they happen? How long is the program? And some of those features.
Sure, yeah, I think maybe we can start with some of that history. So Giwidabindimin first started off by requests from communities needing more than a one day, needing really in-depth training so that they can continue to walk with people in the way that they're already doing. And so 3 of our workshops were put together. We had responding to trauma and grief program come together by putting our grief workshop together, our trauma informed care workshop together, and our vicarious trauma workshop together. And then from there, it sort of started evolving and growing. And then CTRI's elder, Louise Mackay, helped us with a birthing ceremony to really make this program what it is today. And now it is Giwidabindimin, which means we sit together. And it all came from that spirit of togetherness, learning together, being together, feeling together, really. And now we run these programs both publicly and privately. So we'll have some on our public schedules where folks can sign up individually to attend. And we also have organizations and communities that will ask us to come to them and put their own groups together to sit through this program.
And then through being a facilitator in the Giwidabindimin program, a lot of the feedback that we were receiving was, I want more. I wish there was another week of this. How can I access more trainings that are similar to this? And this is sort of where the idea of Giwidabindimin had come in, is what else can we bring to communities? What else might people be looking for? And there's another piece in there where if we start with looking at we are in relation with, right? We are in relation to the land, we are in relation to community. We walk with connection first to our land, to ourselves. And then when we are sitting in that relation with, then we can have hard conversations. And so this is where Giwiidabindimin starts, is that we talk about in relationship to land. We talk about our own relationships, our own learnings and teachings. And then we come together as community to have these hard conversations. And Giwiidabindimin talks about the hard conversations around how to be a helper, what are some skills perhaps that are helpful, and then into some of the conversations around addictions. What does addictions look like in our community? What are we seeing? And then into the conversation around suicide prevention or life promotion. And how do we navigate those conversations, as well as what are our Indigenous communities already have as strengths? And that's something that I've weaved in and out of my work that I haven't heard from many other folks, is what are the strengths our communities already hold? And so I was excited to be able to talk about some of these things in Giwiidabindimin, and not just always a heavy lens, but as well as a survival lens. You know, we carry this knowing in our blood memory. And so how do we access that and use that to our advantage in a different way? So Giwiidabindimin is something that I'm really excited about. It's coming out, it's starting in February is our first public offering. And yeah, I'm really excited to have that program start and see how folks walk with that one.
We often get the question, can you come to our community? And the answer is, if you can get to your community, we can get to your community.
Yeah.
Mhm. I imagine there are many people thinking along those lines. And is this something for me? Is this something I would want to bring to my community? Something I should go to? And as a non-Indigenous person, making me wonder, is it for me? Is there a prerequisite? Do I need to understand about residential schools or trauma or be a counselor? And so I wonder if you can speak to that. Is it for Indigenous helpers, non-Indigenous helpers, people who are newer in their understanding of culture, trauma, and how does that how would a person that is new to that feel in a program like this?
So we've spent a lot of time sitting with that and thinking that through, and we really want it to be inclusive. So we think if you're curious about learning about trauma, grief, vicarious trauma, Giwidabindimin, sorry, is for you. If you're interested in learning about addictions and suicide and life promotion, Giwiidasendamin is for you. So it's for anybody, whether you're a natural helper, maybe you're an elder in your community, maybe you're a professional helper in some capacity. These programs are for you.
Yeah, they are not tailored specifically just for helpers. For me, there's a beautiful opportunity here for talking about reconciliation. And in that is that if we only stay on either sides of our river and we don't cross a bridge, then there's not necessarily the act of walking reconciliation, walking together in new ways of seeing and knowing. And so part of that for me is also about the curiosity. So the curiosity about what is it about suicide or grief that we are seeing? Why? Why are we seeing perhaps more of it, or perhaps we've already seen this amount of it and we're hearing of it now? And the curiosity of leaning in. And so sometimes I also get the questions from people going, what can I do to prepare for these trainings? And for me, the best thing people can do to prepare is to come in curious, come in open-minded, check some of your own biases, perhaps, and really, have an internal look and go, am I ready to be open to receive new knowledge? And am I ready to be open to be curious and ask authentic, kind questions if I don't know? And this is, again, the beauty of having a co-facilitated model is I hope that you can feel connected to not just the group, but at least one of our facilitators to come ask those questions and feel free to lean into that curiosity of knowing. Because this is how, through education, as the late Murray Sinclair says, education is how we're going to get out of this mess. And so to come in with curiosity first, I think is a very, very powerful opportunity for us to sit with.
Thank you. I can't help but think that a week would be an intense week to understand and share and learn about suicide and the histories of residential school. And the reciprocal learning will invariably have an impact on you as facilitators. And so I'm curious, as people who've been involved in this program, what's been the impact the training's had on you as helpers, as a facilitator, your worldview, and how do you take care of yourself through that?
Oh, Nathan, this program has changed my life. I remember the first week of doing this program, and I thought I would put my business hat on, I would put my professional cap on, and I was going to be going to talk about grief and trauma and navigating those spaces. And it was on the Wednesday evening. I remember calling my co-facilitator and being like, there is something happening to me and I don't know what, and I just feel so sad and I feel overwhelmed. And I had a great co-facilitator who really held me gently. And through that, I learned that what I was really experiencing was, my own intergenerational impacts. I knew them, but that's the first time perhaps that my heart was able to feel them and see that in a collective room where people came together. So it was a very, very powerful experience for me the first week I had done a Giwidabindimin program. And now I've been doing several more. I'm not sure how many, I've lost count. But each time I do a program and I sit together in circle and we invite spirit in to sit with us, by the end of the week, I often share that I have found puzzle pieces of my identity that perhaps some of them I did know I was missing and some of them I didn't know that I needed back. And so it's a beautiful opportunity for me in a professional context by doing this work and walking in a good way that feels authentic for the group and it feels like it's in flow for the training and the conversations, that I also receive so many gifts that I'm not expecting. And it's each time I do this program, continue to do this program, I still receive gifts. And it continues to honestly blow my mind how when you come together with people and you open a space of safety and conversation and connectedness and invite spirit in, the beautiful opportunities that can happen. So for me, it has been a life-changing program to be able to facilitate, but mostly, not necessarily as a trainer facilitator, but a conversation facilitator. And a lot of that is I just get to sit and be with the group as well. I don't feel like I bring any more knowledge than the person sitting next to me because we are all equals in circle. And so I get to sit and listen and take in and also be curious and also learn from those I sit with each time. So the program has been a beautiful, incredible opportunity for me that I didn't realize perhaps I needed, but I have been guided to this place in this moment, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here listening to JC's experience and thinking that, this program is really decolonization in action, is reconciliation in action. You're seeing it play out while you're there in the program participating in it. And it's really a beautiful thing. And I think we've all learned so much from the process of the programs growing. And as much as we hear from participants that it's a life-changing experience, I think it's also a life-changing experience for our facilitators.
Decolonizing mental health practices. And I wonder if we can lean in a little bit more on that or even answer the why question. Why is it important for us helpers, social workers to engage in decolonizing mental health practices? How does that tie to reconciliation and why should we be doing that?
And when I think of decolonization, I think of acknowledging trauma from the history of colonization. I think that's where it needs to start. And that's something that these programs address, talking about the impacts of that history, going beyond the history of residential schools, but also all of the systems that have created the situation we're in now and how we can move forward, find voices, and find togetherness and work through that together, right? You see the facilitators coming together to really work through those things. And that's what I mean by it's that reconciliation in action.
And to me, I think we talk a lot about reconciliation and healing from that place of residential schools and that, they had closed many years ago now. And so why are we still talking about it? And it's because I actively still see the harms in everyday life. I see the impact of harm that is present in my own personal life. I see the impact of harm that is present in my professional life. I see it active in harm, honestly, walking down the street and some of my relatives. And so there's those spaces going, we are not out of this. The schools have been closed for years. However, the impacts are still so present. The harm is still present. And if we're not talking about how is it actively ongoing today in a different way, but also a very similar way, right? If we don't come to that space of curiosity and continue learning, then those harms are not going to be changed and progress and healing is not going to be moving forward. And so I think it's so important to be having these conversations with how is it still active? Because it is still quite active and in the spaces that I occupy. And so I love having these conversations with folks going, here's the harms that we're walking through. It might be different than what some of the stories we've heard. However, they're still very present with us. And so for us to be able to talk about that and some of the systems and spaces we need to navigate, and really the voices and how to have a voice and what to say sometimes is the most important place to start, right? So having these conversations is still very important and close to my heart.
Together, dialoguing about this and sharing will be pretty impactful. I'm curious if you can share some of the feedback that you've received from past participants and how the week, the training has influenced their work or their approach to mental health.
Yeah, well, as I was getting ready for coming online with everybody here today, I just printed off some feedback that we received from somebody in one of our recent programs. And one of the lines that stood out is, this program was absolutely life-changing. And this is why we continue to do what we do. We hear a lot of great feedback from people saying that what they didn't expect is that they would learn so much about themselves. You know, you expect to go to training or a workshop and learn these tools and these various ways of maybe doing certain helping roles that you have, and you learn about yourself and you learn about the impacts of history on you and where you are and what your gifts are and how you can bring those gifts then to the work that you do.
Something I receive often from folks is usually day 3, day 4, maybe day 5. And they start talking about, this is not the training I was expecting to come into this week. But oh, this is the training I needed this week. Right. And so part of me as a conversation facilitator is, how are we having those conversations? I try to bring people into circle to start having that space of not sitting at a table, not at a desk with a pen and paper, right? But rather than to sit in conversation with each other. And I think that's the beginning for me of how are we doing this differently and how is that explaining things differently? The other feedback we've gotten is as we sit in circle, some folks are going, well, why don't I have more time with my pen and paper in front of me? And there was somebody we had in one of our recent trainings again, and she says, oh my gosh, I realized that I can't bring all these people home with me. I'm sitting in a room full of 30 other journeys with 30 other people sharing wisdom and sharing their knowledge and sharing their experiences and sharing their heart. And I can't bring them home with me, right? I can bring the manual back with me. I can bring the papers home with me, but I can't bring the experience and I can't bring the people back with me. And I think that was a really powerful opportunity as well, because then we go, okay, so there is something here more than just sitting in circle, but being equals in safety and inviting spirit in to guide us into those spaces that we have curiosity and wisdom again.
And going beyond that traditional, the facilitator is the all-knowing, right? Whereas everybody has equal wisdom that is valuable.
So you've touched on this a bit in terms of differentiating between Giwidabindimin and Giwiidosendamin, and I hear a lot of conversation about sort of there's a common approach of two-eyed seeing that is collective within both. But I'm wondering for those that might be thinking, oh, should I take Giwidabindimin or Giwiidosendamin? And I know Giwidabindimin is we sit together in Ojibwe, and Giwiidosendamin is we walk together. So I feel that's more active. But I wonder if you can kind of spell out maybe some of the distinctions between each, and then to guide that question of like, oh, which program is for me and where I'm at in my journey.
Yeah, so the programs are side by side. There is not a prerequisite of one and then the other. And so as you're asking yourself that question, I would encourage you to look into what is your own curiosity on? What is your own curiosity space that you want to know more about, either in your personal life or whichever helper role you might occupy in a professional space. But first off, what is your curiosity? And lean into that first. And so the Giwiidabindimin, I'll speak to that one. I did share that we started with in relation to, in connection with, and when we were writing that, it was very much, that was the first thing on the top of mind of how do we build connection with and in relation to. And of course, my mind went to land, right? What is the land that our feet grew up on? What land did we come from? What did we learn from the land, the wisdom that is shared with us? And then that space around community and then into ourselves and who are we now? And really, what are our gifts that we're bringing into the spaces that we occupy? Whatever gifts those might be, do you know what they are? And so we're going to be exploring that quite a bit and weaved throughout the program. And then I had shared earlier about, we will be talking about some helper skills of what are communication pieces, how do we listen, how do we have conversations together? And so building some of those skills of just having great conversations, and then into addictions. So talking about what addictions is going to look like, some of the thoughts, feelings behind that. I've talked about in there about what does indigenizing harm reduction look like? What do we see that in our communities? How can we use that in our communities specifically? And again, how are our Indigenous communities providing strength, unique strength in the spaces of addiction, as well as life promotion spaces? There's unique strengths that our communities hold. And so I want to talk about those too in a new way that I think many people may know of, but how do we actively utilize that? And then into, of course, the harm reduction spaces and into the life promotion conversations. What are we seeing? What about our youth? What about our adults? Even what are we sharing with our young people? What are we sharing with our elders? And how are we collectively talking about this? Right? How is those conversations shifting, changing? Do they need to change? If they do, how do we shift those conversations? And then into the opportunities for change talk. So I've been calling it, how do we go from resistance into resilience? But essentially, how do we navigate that internal motivation into an external motivation, right? Or external into internal, vice versa. What works for you? How do we navigate those spaces? And again, how can we create change, but people feeling empowered to create their own change? Because that's, to me, when we have that long-term effect of healing start to happen, is when we link to something within ourselves where I feel empowered to change, and not necessarily have to change for the environment or because the adults around us told us to. Real change comes from that heart space. And so how do I activate that place for myself? Or how can we, as people walking together, activate that for our relatives? How do we walk in a different way, in a good way, where change can happen for folks?
Thank you, JC. I
just wanted to talk a little bit about Giwidabindimin too. So Giwiidosendamin is, has that focus on addictions and suicide, and Giwidabindimin is more focused on trauma, grief, and vicarious trauma. And then there's a focus on, like we talked about earlier, that history of colonization and where those traumas might originate from, the impacts of that trauma, the grief that's associated with all of that, and also its impact on you as a helper.
Giwidabindimin is also written with a sweetgrass framework. So we have really tailored the program into a sweetgrass framework of where did we come from? Who are we now and how are we walking in a good way? As well as where are we going? What are we leaving for our next generations? And so that, I think, is a really key piece with Giwidabindimin that has been written into talking about trauma and impact and grief and impact, is that there has been a mindful space of how do we use a sweetgrass teaching to guide us into the learning for Giwidabindimin.
Thank you. The word and the name Louise has been thrown out a couple times, and I just want to have a shout out to Elder Louise Mackay, who has been a profound and influential guide for the development of this program and support to, I know, yourselves and myself. And so, yeah, she's been her mantra has been bring the clinical and the cultural together. And that message has just rung true throughout the program. So we're past about the halfway or the 30-minute mark, I'll say. And I've been reading the chat, and I'd like to turn and grab some of your questions and offer to you, Mel and JC. So I'll just let you know, some people have been asking to have a little more of an explanation about what two-eyed seeing is exactly, like as a lens and as a practice. So I wonder if you can give a couple more comments to that.
Well, I think if you're wanting to know what two-eyed seeing is in an active way, think about it as a non-Indigenous facilitator and an Indigenous facilitator together, working together to share their knowledge, their gifts with participants on the various topics that are in front of you for that week. So whether that's trauma, grief, vicarious trauma, addictions, or suicide, they're there to share what they've experienced in their helping roles, what they've come to know, maybe some of their teachings. And so weaving both of those perspectives together, but going beyond that too, and allowing for all the participants to share their perspective on those topics as well. So that's what we mean when we talk about two-eyed seeing in our programs.
And to me, two-eyed seeing is a space of reminding ourselves that we are very interconnected, and that as humans who walk this earth, we are still very interconnected to each other. And so those perspectives of not just seeing and knowing and sharing that lens, but as well as reminding ourselves that we are interconnected as a human race. And a big part of that is going to be in balance. And how do we keep that in balance? So to know that we need to co-create, spaces around healing. We need to co-create spaces with sustainability for our land. We need to co-create, a curiosity that is going to lead us into these places of healing and reconciliation. And so two-eyed seeing is a concept that we have used. However, two-eyed seeing is also a call to action. And so in that call to action, it's going to be asking you, how are you walking in a good way to see others? How are you walking in a good way where you are open and curious about new ideas? How are you walking in a good way that you are asking kind questions that help you learn and find spaces for your own learning? How are you walking in a good way where you're not depending on somebody else to share their culture with you, but rather than you are actively going out to seek those answers on your own, right? And so this two-eyed seeing space, part of it is that it does give you, or puts a lot of accountability into yourself in who am I, how am I curious, and am I navigating that place where I am seeing others' perspectives, where I'm hearing others' voices, and I am asking questions to our elders in ways that are helping me expand my own learning, and that genuineness for our hearts to hear that. Right. And so we're going to, I don't want to get into too much of a teaching in that, but for me, it's that longest road, right, from our heads to our hearts. And if we are only going to be in our heads, then the two-eyed seeing approach to me encourages me to ask questions from my heart and be curious from my heart. And to me, that's when I know that I'm on the right path to walking in a good way, in my own life and in my own learning and my own curiosities.
We have a few more minutes left together, so I'll encourage you to add your questions to the chat, and I will ask them of Mel and JC. This week sounds very much like it could be even overwhelming for somebody with residential school intergenerational trauma in their background, whether you're a lived experience as an Indigenous person or non-Indigenous person. People are asking, how does that impact people? How do you create that emotional, that safety, emotional wellness within the week? And for instance, how do you balance hard topics with something lighter? Is there humor at all within these spaces?
Yeah.
That's what I was just going to say. As much as it, yes, sometimes is heavy and heartfelt, there is a lot of laughter always in these programs. People really start to connect together, and there's that safety as well. Also, with all of that, our facilitators are trained helpers, and so they can help people to ground if they need that in the moment, to offer support. And there's also some parameters that our facilitators make sure that people are sharing in a safe way, that they're not sharing in a way that might overwhelm others. And sometimes that might mean that, they might have to stop a conversation, not in a obviously doing that in a kind way, but it's a protective thing. It's to make sure that everybody feels safe and can share, but can also not feel overwhelmed.
Yeah. And as a facilitator, that's something I talk about in the very first morning is the group ourselves. I always have my groups identify what feels safe, also what doesn't feel safe, and what do we need in the room for, that safety and that connection to flourish. And in those conversations, I talk about, how we share safely of ourselves, as well as how we share safely and be mindful of others. And I always let folks know, I might have to engage in a conversation where we deviate from that topic, or that we just come back and we use some grounding techniques, we practice some new skills, because those conversations are very present. And for me as a conversation facilitator, at the top of mind to ensure that safety is created in that place. And some groups, I've had groups where we decided that it's not a safe place to lean into a lot of those experiences or stories, right? And so we navigate that as the group feels ready and safe to do so. And so this is where, again, the beauty of each program is different because it's the people who bring spirit and energy into the room. And so what does that group need? What does each person need in that group to be safe to have these conversations? Because they are very tough conversations to have.
Yeah, and there's also that balance. I've seen groups have dance breaks. So there's also that fun that happens, that laughter, and laughter is medicine. So there's that balance of both, sometimes the tough, but also the lightheartedness and connection.
Yeah, and we do bring medicine into the room as well. So for me, I always carry the 4 medicines with me, and will often share in that teaching and in that medicine throughout the week. So, often there is sage, tobacco, always cedar, sweetgrass. And that is free use for anybody who needs to use it throughout the day. Also, in my trainings, I open the day and I close the day with smudge. And so it's coming together and opening and coming together, and then also closing in a good way. So ensuring that we're being really mindful of bringing in, again, not just what a Western training looks like, but an Indigenous way of knowing and walking that are based on my learnings, my teachings. And I want to share that in that 2 eyes perspective I get to hold and share with folks. I take full opportunity to bring in medicine and share. And I know that several other and trainers do as well. It's important that we bring medicine and that healing back into the room as well. Yeah. As well as elders. We try to invite elders in, both community elders as well as sometimes, our elder Louise, she's joined in quite a few Giwidabindimins as well. So trying to have an elder there, if at all possible, to ensure that there is somebody from our culture or the community's culture and teachings and knowledge. So for someone to talk to, not just necessarily a trained professional helper, but as well as an elder who can also share that space with us.
Thank you, JC, Mel, for your insightful sharing here. We're nearing the end of our time. I appreciate there are several more questions here. We will take note of your questions that we didn't get to. They provide also excellent content for our blog writers, for our workshop developers, for future free webinars. Maybe the last question that I'll throw to you is, one was, are you coming to Ontario, or will this be available online? Mel, JC, would you be able to speak about when we are planning to hold these in the future?
Yeah, so currently we have a few private contracts who are interested. So encourage your spaces of employment or spaces who might be able to bring in a facilitation into a community. Encourage them to contact us, as well as we do public offerings in Ontario. Right now, I don't know if there's any specific dates set.
Not yet. We're looking at it.
We are looking at, I believe, March, April, possibly May. We are looking at bringing those into Ottawa, I believe.
Yeah.
And last fall, actually just a few weeks ago, we were in Toronto. So we do try to come into Ontario. I know that for sure we do private trainings in Ontario. If there is an interest, let us know. Either throw it in the chat where you're from. We're always looking at where can we bring this to community who is interested. So by all means, just because we have public offerings in Toronto doesn't mean that we can't bring a public offering to your area.
Yeah, and just check out our website. That's the best way to find out where we're offering our public workshops. All the information is on there. And if you have questions after that, feel free to contact us. We're always excited to connect with folks out there in the community. So please feel free to do that. And then there was the question of the online. We don't offer this program online. We feel that the in-person connections are so valuable. So we're keeping it to in-person for right now.
That's right. So definitely you can subscribe to our newsletter. Lots of information about future Giwidabindimin, Giwiidosendamin programs, other trainings, trauma-informed training, counseling training, mental health and leadership training. I'll note we are offering a Giwidabindimin program in Winnipeg, January 13 to 17, a Giwidabindimin program in Calgary, January 20 to 24, a Giwiidosendamin, the first inaugural delivery will be in Winnipeg, February, 3 to 7. And yes, lots more on our website. So thank you for attending and participating in this conversation. I wanted to leave you with some final words. So this has all been inspired by the elder Albert Marshall on Two-Eyed Seeing. And I was privileged to see a session of his a while back. And he left the close with these words: the more we know who we are and where we come from, the more we get to know one another and talk, the more we will create a better world for everyone. So I'll sign off by saying, be well, and may you keep the dialogue going.